In a world where legends rise and fall with every punch, where the roar of the crowd fades, but the stories live on. This is where those stories are told. This is Talkin' Boxing with Billy C. From the blood, the sweat, and the glory, to the controversies, comebacks, and knockouts, we go behind the ring, no fluff, no hype, and definitely no BS. Just the truth behind the fight game. And we've been doing it for over 2 decades. A podcast pioneer, now a Hall of Famer.
Great. What's that ego gonna be like?
And next, the comeback kid.
Wait, isn't he like 90 or something?
Shut up, he'll hear you. The reigning, defending, undisputed, heavyweight champion of boxing broadcasting. It's Talkin' Boxing with Billy C. And it's on now.
And we're coming to you live from the Billy C studio in Lake George, New York. I'm Bill Calogero, and it's time for Not the Billy C Show today. We're kicking off our new series, Billy C's Roundtable. Today's topic is going to be basically the same question you hear a million times before. Were the fighters of yesteryear better than the fighters today? And we got a great panel that's going to be commenting on that. Joining us first is my man Jack Hirsch, and Jack is an author. You know, Jack. You know how it is in speaking in New Yorkese. You know, Jack's Jack. You have to unmute your mic, by the way. Jack's an author and a historian, and he's got his new book out. He was on this show on Mike Spinks. Jack, thanks for joining us, man. What's up?
Thanks for having me on, Billy. And I was wrong. The World Cup game, I think, just ended, so no excuse for anyone not to tune in. They tune in anyway. They pick your show over the World Cup anyway.
The beauty of technology is they could have watched both and then joined us a little bit later. But also joining us is another writer and historian. He's got a couple of great books out. One of my favorites on Lou Ambers, Jack Dillon, many, many more, including his newest one on William Bradley. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, Mark Allen Baker joins us. What's up, Mark?
Hi, Billy. Hi, Jack. Nice to be here.
We got I got 2 more people coming on here in a minute. Mike Silver is scheduled to join us, and also Carl Weingarten. But we will start right now. So our topic is, were the fighters of yesteryear better than the fighters today? Jack, I'll toss it up to you first. Do you think they were?
Well, could they have beaten the guys today, kept up with the great fighters of today? And I hate to say it, now I'm not a youngster. I'm 72 years old. I'll make my age public. And I used to love Carlos Ortiz, both on a professional and personal level, but he doesn't beat a Shakur Stevenson, for example. Shakur Stevenson would basically, outpoint him, shut him down. There are exceptions to the rule. For example, Muhammad Ali would beat any heavyweight around today. But like all in all, I mean, the answer is no. Just look at the other sports. If we didn't have a clock on Jesse Owens, we'd say he was quicker than Usain Bolt. People would be saying that if they didn't have a clock, if there wasn't that evidence. But they can't say it because boxing does not quite produce evidence. And I just want to say one thing, and then I'll turn it over to Mark here. You might talk about all the fights the old timers had compared to today, and you might say that proves they're better, they're more skilled, they fought a lot more. Guys with 25 fights are getting title shots. And in past eras, that would just be warming up. But I got to point out, the old timers did not have the extensive amateur background. And the top guys today have been in fierce amateur competition, elite amateur competition with tremendous fighters. I mean, who they'd later maybe meet as pros. And look at a guy like Lomachenko, Usyk. What did these guys have? About 300 amateur fights. So not all of them were recorded, but approximately. And that's the case with today's guys. For the most part, they've had an extensive amateur career, unlike the fighters of the past.
So let me ask you this, because we're going to touch on all of that. But do you think, my main question, do you think the fighters of yesteryear were better than the fighters of today, talent-wise?
No, they weren't as athletic. They didn't have everything at their disposal the same way. They just didn't. I understand there were more gyms, and I'm talking about the top guys for the most part.
Right.
Quantity-wise, yeah, you had more quantity. So I guess you can make an argument that your 6-round fighters back in the day were maybe better than what you have today. But all in all, if you look at the elite guys, unbalanced, the answer is no. But it depends what eras are cut off. When we're saying in the past, are we talking the 70s, 80s, 30s?
No. The way I looked at it is, taking fighters from, let's say, the 30s through the early 70s, or even we could say through the 70s. That's fighters of yesteryear, and then from the 80s on up to current is what I'm looking at. But so basically, you think the fighters of today were better?
The top fighters of today, like on balance. I mean, if you had to put, for example, any light heavyweight champion of the past, I shouldn't say any, but you put them against the David Benavidez, they're going to have more than their hands full, beating a David Benavidez, for example. And is a Billy Conn going to keep away from, let's say, a Tyson Fury the way he did with Joe Louis? Louis was a great technical fighter. Don't misunderstand me. And if we're doing a list of who was better than who, it should be done based on how each guy looked in his specific era, how he fought in his era. So I would put Louis and Ali 1-2 if I had to, rate the heavyweights. But do I believe Joe Louis would have beaten the guys who came after him, like a Mike Tyson, a Larry Holmes? I don't think so.
Mark, what's your thoughts?
Well, I think Jack hit a lot of key points right there. I think all these fighters are products of their time. Be it a victim, being a benefactor, on the two extremes. In other words, again, they faced world wars, they faced the Great Depression, they faced a stock market crash going back to the 20s. It was a different time. One of the interesting things is the Ring magazine in February 2022 ranked all the fighters by who they thought that were ranked fighters, which was an interesting assessment and a way to look at it, because then you're comparing the champion to the other ranked fighters of that era. And I think that paints a certain picture. In support of what Jack said, the tools that are available now to contenders and to participants are unbelievable. The nutrition, the training, the advancements in training, the equipment, is unbelievable what you can do to isolate muscles, isolate certain movements. That was never available. So I think it's interesting. It's nice to throw around names in the past, but you've really got to look at the champions and the contenders and what they had to offer statistically, if you really want to do that. But I think I agree with Jack. I think the preparation now and the people that are fighting at the higher levels have got so much going for them from a resource perspective. You just didn't have that in the past. Some fighters had no access to that information. You go back to the early black fighters during segregation. They were never given access to training material that the white fighters had, and the list goes on and on. So I'm with Jack. I support the preparation. I support the technical skills and the talent of the current champions and contenders.
Well, joining us now, also a writer, author, historian, One of my favorite books he wrote, The Art of Boxing, The Rise and Fall of the Sweet Science, and his newest book, When in Doubt, Stop the Bout. My man Mike Silver joins us. Mike, what's up, brother? I'm not hearing you, Mike. You got your mic? Yeah, you're muted here. All right, you got something going on with the microphone, but Mike is here. Just double check, make sure you got your sound on. But anyway, our topic, just to catch you up, we're basically the fighters of yesteryear, better than the fighters of today. And so far, Jack Hirsch, who's with us, feels that the fighters of today are better. And Mark Allen Baker just joined his thoughts on that too. Can we hear you now, Mike? No, you have your on the screen, Mike, on this. So yeah, you just unmuted it. Now I don't know if I can hear you. No, you got something going on. He's got something going on with his microphone. It's your mic, not speakers. But in any event, you guys made some great points, because that was exactly something I was going to say. Because I got to be honest, I was anticipating you guys to say that you like the old time fighters, and I'm especially interested in hearing what Mike has to say, because I know he's got all the stats of the yesteryear fighters versus today. Do we have your sound yet, Mike? No, we can't read your lips, brother. We do need a mic there at least. So see if you can work on that as soon as I have it open on my end. So as soon as you get it squared away, we'll hear you. But anyway, that golden era that we were talking about, fellas, was, let's say, 1930 through the 70s. Back in those days, the frequency of the fights was much more. I mean, they fought between 10 and 20 fights a year versus today's fighters, who are only fighting once or 3 times a year. A fighter fights 3 times a year, he gets a Fighter of the Year award. So that kind of backs what you guys were saying, Jack. I mean, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, the point I was trying to make, and I know Mark was making it as well. I think he made it better than I did. The fighters today have so much more at their disposal. A case in point, look at the other sports like tennis. Rod Laver, an absolute legend. And how do you compare Rod Laver to Djokovic, Nadal, Federer? They have so much at their disposal, nutritionalists, different type of conditioners, sports psychologists. I mean, they have the works. I mean, if you want to compare era against era and say one fighter was better in his era than the other guy was in his, I'm okay with that. If you want to give me a top 10 listing and give a guy from 80 years ago, I give a guy like Harry Greb, call him the greatest fighter of all time, I'm not going to argue with that, because what he did was amazing. It was amazing. But I'm going to tell you this, the guys of the past, if they were boxing today, they would fight the same amount of times, and the guys today would be fighting more in the past, like the guys did in the past. It's a different era. They're more athletic today. I mean, all in all, there are exceptions to the rules with super fighters. Okay, if you're going to ask me who would win between Muhammad Ali and Tyson Fury at his best, yeah, I'll say Muhammad Ali. But, there's something that I want to bring to Mike Silver's attention when he gets on. And this is a funny story. I wish he was on there. Mike's a good guy. I knew him way back in the day. We kind of fell out of touch for no particular reason. But in 1983, I was talking boxing with Mike Silver. I remember that time. And we had a pandemic of guys getting cut all the time. It was a problem. And Mike said to me, the reason guys are getting cut today is because they don't know how to fight, the modern fighters of today. He said that in 83. So when did guys forget how to fight? I mean, 10, 20 years later, I mean, from the 60s to the 80s, did guys' skills start to falter? It just doesn't happen.
Jack,
Look at
hold
every
that
other sport.
hold that thought. Mike, do we have your sound yet? No, I guess not. I guess we don't have Mike's sound. I didn't mean to cut you off, Jack.
No, that's fine. It's an argument that raises passions, and I'm looking at it with a level head. I mean, emotionally, I root for the old timers.
Right, and I think
I'd like to say the old timers were better. I'd love to say that.
I think we all do, in a sense. And Jack, I just want to say one thing: double check your microphone setting on what if you're on your computer. Double check your microphone setting and make sure that it's able to be given to other software, because it's showing that it sees that you have one. It just must be muted or something on your end, not through the software. Look on the computer. But in any event, we're going to hopefully Mike will get that cooking. But Mark, I personally, I think that the fighters of yesteryear had more heart. And I also believe that they were way tougher than the fighters today, not only physically, but mentally. And before you respond, I want to just play a clip for you guys. It's basically talks about what you both kind of opened the show with. It's just take a watch and listen to
Decades ago, fighters relied on raw grit and brutal, unforgiving routines. Today, science and technology construct the ultimate athlete.
You see, now, that's basically what you said in a nutshell with some of the training techniques. But mentally, I think, Mark, that's a big advantage that the fighters of yesteryear had.
Well, they had to endure so much adversity, so much. Even the ones that didn't want to endure it ended up enduring it. But one point to that is you talked about fight frequency. Let me give you some numbers. From 1920, following the enactment of the Walker Law, of the 15 middleweight champions, all but three had over 100 career bouts. Now you skip to from 1940 to 1960, and 11 champions, and only 5 had over 100 total bouts. So you can see the decrease in frequency right there, and that's due to a lot of the factors we mentioned earlier. Is the outside effects that were taking their toll on the fighters, some of which made the fighters or hardened the fighters, if you will, others that made them face adversities that they never thought of politically, to get good fights, or in some cases to get proper training because of the color of their skin, for example. So I wanted to pinpoint that. But to support your fact there, it's the adversity. It's the adversity that they had to overcome. And I think a lot of these, I can't say a lot, I can't say a specific number, but I think the adversities harden them more so than the adversities that are facing modern day fighters.
It just, in my opinion, I just think, in all sports, not just boxing, in society, we've become collectively mentally weak. Everybody has to go, see a therapist. That now it's encouraged. I mean, that was unheard of back in the day, and I just think that it just seems like people today, fighters, since we're talking about fighters, have a tendency to point the fingers at other reasons for maybe a loss or not performing up to par. But that's my thought, and it just seems that fighters are talking a lot of trash, but their first priority is to preserve their O. They've put so much value in that O, and I believe that the end result is one of those reasons why they fight fewer times, why they're picking the easier fights, because they don't want to risk losing the O. And I think the sport has suffered because of that. What's your guys' thoughts? Hey, first of all, Mike, do we have you? We still don't have Mike's sound. But anyway, real quickly, joining us now is a boxing film expert. He's put together Lost Rounds and made us a complete fight of the Tommy Burns and Jack Johnson fight, and his newest documentary on the history of boxing and film. You got to check out his work. He's been on the show before. Carl Weingarten joins us. What's up, Carl?
Hey there, gentlemen. How are you?
Hi, Carl.
We're joined with Jack Hirsch, Mark Allen Baker, Mike Silver, who's having some microphone issues, and yourself. Our topic is, were the fighters of yesteryear better than the fighters of today? My first question to you real quickly to get caught up here, do you think the fighters of yesteryear were better than the fighters of today?
I have been watching a little bit of the broadcast as I was trying to get the right button pushed on my end. I think it's a complicated question in that there are so many variables as to the business of boxing, the officiating, the rules, what was allowed, what was not allowed, and how fighters conducted their combat in one era to the next, what was accepted, what was not accepted. And it's already, you guys mentioned nutrition and training and that sort of thing, all comes into factors. So are we talking about, person to person contest, taking someone out of the 1930s era versus someone in the 80s era, and just on its face, given that they stepped through the twilight zone, what would happen? Or are we talking about them in their own eras and the quality of their work within their own eras?
Hey, Carl, you just threw out a great question. The truth of the matter is that I think Mark alluded to it before, and I agree. You can only hold a fighter accountable for the era in which they fight and the fact that they fought other fighters in their weight class during that era. No fighter should be faulted if people say, oh, the 70s were a great era for heavyweights. Well, fighters that fought in the 90s, heavyweights, cannot be criticized because they didn't have a crop of fighters like there were in the 70s. So I agree. But I think to take the mentality of that time zone, plucking a fighter from yesteryear and putting them in against a fighter today, I think that is more along the lines of what we were comparing. So in that regard, do you think the fighters of today are better?
I think it's a mixed bag.
Mm-hmm. Depends on the fighters.
They are superior in some ways that's significant. They have advantages of nutrition and they have advantages in facilities. But I think maybe some people would agree, if you talk to fighters who go back to the 20s when there were gyms on every neighborhood in New York, they would say the gyms of today were like, Club Med. That there's a lot of stuff there, but it's pretty, everything is provided for you to get in, this physical condition. And that's a significant difference, I think, psychologically. What was it? Stillman's gym? It was like the walls were never cleaned or something, like deliberately. It would be a punishing environment. But modern fighters, just like all modern athletes, have some advantages that they can extend themselves in ways that the old fighters maybe could not have. And yet there are some differences that we can see in changes in the rules that are brought.
100%. And the rounds and everything else. So jumping back to, I want to see if possibly we have a different feed that Mike is working on. So we're going to let me check to see if we got Mike on this feed.
I went to my cell phone. Can you hear me on my cell phone?
Yeah, we're hearing a lot of you. There's a huge echo,
Is there an echo?
in there because you have the other computer still on.
Oh, let me shut the other computer.
That's
Okay.
what it is. But anyway, while he's messing with that, fellas, let's go jump back to my question about preserving the O. Mark, what's your thoughts?
Absolutely. More numbers contest. If you take, just take a look at what happened to baseball and what happened with sabermetrics and the whole statistical trend forward.
We hear you, Mike. We got you.
Great. Fantastic.
All right, wait,
numbers-
hold on. Mark. Go ahead, Mark.
Numbers are an important factor. Absolutely. For getting good matches, for getting good money. That's paramount. These kids are watching those like there's no tomorrow. Their managers, they're the promoters, everybody. They're very numbers conscious. In the same way, the baseball, the players are looking at, wins against replacement. They're looking at the magic numbers, 3,000 strikeouts and 300 wins. They watch those things like a hawk. And so numbers are a big factor right now. Big factor.
Jack, what's your thoughts?
My question is this. Why do we only have this debate when it comes to boxing? For example, my boyhood idol was Mickey Mantle, like a lot of kids. And if you ask me objectively, who's better, him or Aaron Judge? Aaron Judge is better. As much as that, but emotionally, I'm always going to pick the Mets. And why is it always just in boxing, football, NFL? We're not saying Otto Graham was better than Tom Brady, but Otto Graham in his time, you could say, accomplished more than Tom Brady did in a sense in his. Or at least that would be debatable in a certain way. But we only have this argument when it comes to boxing.
Mike Silver finally got his mic work, and we got a nice close-up of shot of him. He's got his echoes off, and I know he's chomping at the bit to get involved. He's driving crazy. Mike,
Fleischer we have around today.
Hey,
that as a compliment, Mike.
I love all you guys. I love you guys. You're true boxing people. You're for the sport. I love all of you. But my head's about to explode. When you talk about, if I could just cover a few topics quickly, talk about conditioning. First of all, you mentioned diet is better. Was there any fighter better conditioned than Rocky Marciano? It's generally acknowledged that he was the best conditioned, certainly maybe the best conditioned fighter ever. Who trained him? Who conditioned him? Who supervised his diet? Charlie Goldman, who fought from 1902 to 1912. It's a bantamweight and featherweight, okay? He fought in the era of Terry McGovern, Stanley Ketchel, and others, okay? Are you kidding me? The problem with boxing is that people don't see it as an art. They don't see it. They see, they say, well, look, we now so many runners are running a 4-minute mile. Years ago, a 4-minute mile when it was broken, 1956, that made headlines throughout the world. The weightlifters are lifting more weight. Boxing is different than these other sports. Boxing is an art. And I'll tell you something, I force myself really to watch the current fights because as my good friend Bill Goodman, who's a boxing historian, he's quoted very much so in my first book. He's one of these guys, you ever go into a taxi cab and they find out a guy's a top expert on ballet. Nobody knows him, but he studied it his whole life. He said to me, Mike, the problem is once you've tasted filet mignon, you can't go back to beef stew. Well, to me, the fighters of the old days and the great era of boxing was the 1920s, right into the early 60s, when boxing reached its peak in terms of technique, in terms of conditioning, again. Don't you remember those old 45-round fights, the 25-round fights? Fighters were in terrific condition, and they didn't have to do weightlifting, which is terribly damaging. Fortunately, we're getting away from that now. I just want to make a comparison, and I think this could explain it. I made it a point. I didn't buy the fight, but I saw the highlights of the recently junior middleweight title fight, if you want to call it that. I don't call them champions. I call them title claimants. I think it's throwing around a word that loses all meaning when you start calling these people world champions. I don't care if you call them WA, WB, bullshit, whatever it is. they're title claimants. We used to have title claimants years ago, but the ones who were recognized as the world champions, you know who recognized them? The people recognized them because you could follow boxing back then. So the people were able to know when Stanley Ketchel was one of the title claimants, along with other, other top middleweights. Well, he beat the crap out of the other, with the other contenders. He was recognized. There was no WBC, WA. There was just general recognition that this was the best middleweight in the world. That's long gone. But take the fight between Jaron Ennis and Xander Zayas. Okay, these are the two recognized as the WBO junior middleweight champions. By the way, the junior middleweight champion began in 1962. Nobody ever heard of it before that. Another unnecessary weight division, in my opinion. But let's see, Zayas' record. Okay, I think he was the champion coming in.
He had both belts. He had both belts.
Huh? He held two belts
on the line.
Okay, 23-0. Nice, 23-0. You know what 23-0 was in 1949? It was a beginner. He had 131 rounds, a total of 131 rounds. Averaged 3 fights a year in the how many years he was a pro? 7 years. The new champion, Jaron Ennis, 35-0. Okay, something like 32 knockouts, which is absurd to begin with. 32 knockouts. I mean, even the great punchers of years ago didn't have a 95% KO record. Very rare. So here we have a 35-0. 32 KOs, total 132 rounds of experience. So with rounds, they're sort of evenly matched, but they weren't evenly matched because Zayas obviously was the inferior fighter. But and I don't want to get into too many details at once, but that fight should have been stopped in the 5th round. But that's another issue.
But listen, listen, Mike.
Yeah.
And what we were saying was the fact that they're not fighting as much. Yeah. And they're also protecting their So these fights that you just rattled off, those wins and stuff, and you're trying to compare them to the older fighters. It's a hard comparison, in my opinion, because that whole road to that 35-0 or that 23-0 was not against top-notch fighters. Now, wait, in all due respect, the fighters of yesteryear, they were fighting once every couple of weeks, but they weren't fighting in top fights every single time. They were fighting some other guys too because of what you just said. It was a trade. It was their job. That's how they made a living.
Yes, but it's like any other job. Even you're a bricklayer. You're a better bricklayer 2 years later than when you were when it first started.
Of course. But Jack mentioned about the amateur careers early.
No.
And Mark, and I don't know. I agree with you, Jack, in terms of the amateur numbers, but I don't agree with using it as a comparison as a pro because, as we've seen, even the best amateurs with a couple hundred fights get into the pros and they don't know how to deal with that pro. A couple of little cheap shots here and there. It's not as rule oriented as the amateurs.
No, amateur boxing is not to be. It's not like amateur. It's not like collegiate basketball and pro basketball. You could take a collegiate star and he becomes a star right away in pro basketball. Same thing for football. Not the way it used to be. Now, as far as those amateurs with 300 fights, you take an amateur with 30, 40, 45, 50 fights, he's no different than an amateur who has 310 fights. The amateur is limited to 3 rounds. It's that they can't vary the style that much. It's amateur boxing. The rules are far different than they are in pro boxing. The rules of basketball are not that much different in collegiate as pros. In boxing, it's different. But I just wanted to finish my point about this junior middleweight fight, just as a comparison, when the argument that the fighters are better now. Just the first junior middleweight fight was between, does anybody remember who it was, the first junior middleweight title fight?
Was it Freddie Little against the South Korean?
No, that came
right. And then he beat Ben Venuti, was a junior middleweight champ at the start.
Yeah. That was a few years later.
Freddie Little at the start. 60.
Little was, I think, about a few years later.
Sandro Masinji from Italy. Too.
Right. Sandro Masinji. Very good fighter, by the way. Very good fighter.
Yeah.
But the first junior middleweight fight was between Denny Moyer, who had a record of 32-8, but 340 rounds of professional experience. And then you had Joey Giambra, who was nearing the end of his career, wanted a payday. They said, "We'll give him one, really a legitimate middleweight." He came down to junior middleweight. Joey Giambra, top middleweight in the mid-50s, had a record of 65-7-2, 515 rounds. Now, compare that, 340 rounds for the new champion to both Ennis and Zayas, who had 131 rounds, and Joey Giambra 515 rounds. That experience is, you can't, it's just, you can't dismiss it. And it's, so, that counts for something. And what happened to boxing is there was a disconnect as boxing began to lose its mainstream status. In fact, it actually began in the late 50s. Most of the clubs were being shut down. That was the farm system for boxing. A lot of trainers, good trainers, couldn't make a living in the sport anymore. They left the sport or they took another job. And the problem is you had a disconnect where they used to mentor the young trainers, but a lot of them weren't. It was like, half the medical schools shutting down. And you had, beginning in the 70s, 80s, you had 90, you had mediocre fighters becoming mediocre trainers. A lot was lost, a lot. And just, again, you have to look at the technical aspect of it when you're saying fights. I watched, I didn't see the whole fight. I saw the highlights of Ennis and Zayas. And right away, both fighters had their legs were spread apart. They weren't in a normal stance where you could quickly maneuver on footwork, be very fluid in your movement. I see that in most fighters today. And the announcer says, he's loading up with punches. He's loading up with his punch. That's a phrase never used to be used before, because fighters today constantly load up, every punch tries to be landed with knockout power. There's no setup. The footwork, there's no rhythm to it. Their feet are too far apart. You notice this right away. They're not working off the jab enough. They're trying to land that knockout punch. And in terms of the technique, it's deteriorated incredibly. You will see occasionally what was the Russian featherweight lightweight who was so good? Lomachenko. Lomachenko was a bit of, whenever you see a throwback, they become dominant. You see Crawford. He's a throwback. He has old school moves. Somebody asked me, I remember interviewing for my first book, The Art of Boxing. I interviewed an old school trainer, and I said, "You got to admit, Manny Pacquiao's a hell of a fighter." He says, "Yeah, he's a tough guy. He's good. He's dominating." I said, and he said to me something I'll never forget. He said, "Mike, go back 50, 60, 70 years. There were 20 Manny Pacquiaos, not just one."
Mike, I got to cut in because your book, The Art of Boxing, was entertaining. I bought it, and you're a knowledgeable guy. I'm not disputing that in the slightest. But you made a remark. Yeah. You referred to Marvin Hagler, Carlos Monzon, and said something to the effect, well, if they were fighting back in the 30s, I'm paraphrasing, that they'd be maybe lower top 10 contenders. I mean, that's kind of hard to swallow. And you said Tammy Morello could actually maybe beat Lennox Lewis. That was ludicrous.
Let me explain. I interviewed several old school top trainers, and whose opinion I greatly respect. What he said was, and I didn't necessarily agree with it, but I can't dismiss him entirely. What he said was that Tammy Morello would find Lennox Lewis's chin. He could. Now, Tammy Morello was a pretty decent fighter. Solid right hand punch. This man who I interviewed, Mike Capriano Jr., who's a terrific boxing mind, he started watching fights in the late 30s, 39, 40. And he had, his father was Mike Capriano Sr., was raised in a gym. And, he said that Tammy Morello, now he might have been a little prejudiced because his father trained Tammy Morello, but he said he would find, and what happened to Lennox Lewis? He was flattened twice by mediocrities.
Yeah, but wait a minute. I got to jump in about that because when you look at heavyweights, the heavyweights it's the only division that it's going to be really hard to convince people, not from a heart perspective, like because you're rooting for the older guys, but just physically. Look at Lennox Lewis. I use Lennox Lewis as an example. All right, Rocky Marciano never weighed 190 pounds. Right, Jack Johnson in his day was a monster at 6 foot, ½ inch tall, 205 pounds. He was a monster. Let's fast forward. Even Muhammad Ali, wasn't anywhere near the size of a Lennox Lewis. Introduce Lennox Lewis, a 6'5", 6'6" guy, 240 pounds, chiseled with hand speed and footwork. It's very hard to say that even like my favorite fighters, like a Rocky Marciano or even a Jack Johnson, would have been able to compete. And one question I do have, and I wanted to throw at Carl, you had to have seen with all of the film that you've reviewed, you had to have seen some type of evolution. Exactly what we're all talking about. Mike is the talent. He's saying that the skill sets were more because of the numbers and the amount of quality trainers, etc., which all makes sense. But have you been able to see an evolution of the quality of boxing get better from those early footage, right on up, even if you go from the Burns Johnson era up to the Joe Louis era, the techniques have been fine tuned. I mean, you see,
there's a point of arrival where
who's answering
the post bare knuckle guys.
Who's talking?
Carl Weingarten is talking.
I can't hear Carl. I can't hear him. I can't hear.
Okay,
Carl.
well, we hear him. Go ahead, Carl.
Where the post bare knuckle guys were innovating, like Corbett was introducing a number of different techniques and followed quickly by Joe Gans. And they were doing something almost akin to like adding a martial arts element to what had been just, basically street fighting. And they sort of opened the door. And it took a number of years, like a decade, going through Jack Johnson and, like I said, Joe Gans, and then not recognized nearly as well in his country, George Carpentier, bringing in other elements of technique into this boxing. And finally, up to Jack Dempsey, we sort of really arrive at something that is very familiar to us today in terms of movement, complete body movement, not just the arms and putting yourself next to the opponent, and which had a whole variety of techniques. And from that point, then there's a continued evolution and things start branching out, and we get some very complicated characters, through the 20s, Gene Tunney, the 30s, and then Joe Louis, and everybody's bringing their own elements to this. Different communities, as more and more black and white fighters are paired together in matches. These two cultures that had been separate for a long time, and like baseball, had developed their own approaches to the game. We're now mixing it together and sharing and techniques and abilities and learning from each other. The couple things that Mike had mentioned, I just wanted to follow up on something that he said when he talks about differences. I think there are, in these different eras, there are differences and techniques that have gotten left behind. Things that the old guys did that was really good, and the newer fighters don't do it. And in the old days, as my father pointed out when I was first following boxing, the guys stood right in front of each other, and they really fought. Now it's like, let's see how much we can not fight and how much I can not get hit, and it's more of a chess game, and there's a beauty to that, but it's not the same thing. The one thing I did want to mention,
but isn't that
Mike had said earlier, if I could,
Carl? Isn't that part of the evolution of
yeah,
sweet science?
And it makes it difficult to make these black and white comparisons. Which is better than the other when you're talking about pastels and watercolors and all kinds of techniques, and the rules have changed. The rules now, if someone like, for instance, Jack Johnson fought the way that he fought then, he would likely get disqualified for holding and hitting, because that's half of what he did.
Who the ref is. The referees, some of them let it happen and some don't.
There's
the 45 rounds that Mike mentioned before the fighters fought. Those are wrestling matches for a good part of the time.
Well, it depends on the fight.
Wait a minute. It depends when you go, how far you go back. Like the guy I wrote about, a round was constituted when a guy hit the deck, and they had 30 seconds, but once it went to Queensberry rules where it was 3-minute rounds, and they're fighting like Joe Gans, they're fighting 30 rounds, 25 rounds. That's in a desert with how cold was the bottle of water that they were giving them, so
Also, you have to figure by the 80s, you said guys going 15 rounds in the 15th, they're about ready to drop from exhaustion.
Right.
And I've got footage of, like, I think it's the Owen Moran and battling Nelson, and you see them racing to each other just at the beginning of a round, and there's a card saying round 24.
No, I know.
So
I know.
I'm saying, what I'm saying is that there are things that they, for whatever reason, they were able to accomplish in their areas that they're not doing now.
No, and listen, the technology.
I would agree with that.
The points we made earlier about, when Mark and Jack made about the technologies. I mean, look at it this way, Mark. James Jeffries, when he trained, he thought it was to toughen himself up. He would only limit himself to one bottle, 1 quart of water. He would train all day long and limit himself to 1 bottle of water and a quart. And that he thought that was toughening him up. He's lucky he didn't die of dehydration.
Well, yeah, no question about it. But these again, when it comes back to rounds and stuff, and I've talked
Billy, I'm still having issues. I can't hear anybody.
We hear you fine. So there's something going on with your speaker, but that we'll get to you, and we hear you fine. So it's your speaker. But go ahead, Mark.
Again, a lot of the boxers train to the length of the fight. That's one thing. So I mean, if they knew they were doing 12 rounds, 15 rounds, they'll train to that. Okay. I remember talking to Bert Sugar about fights that had they ended in the 12th round instead of the 15th round, who would have won? Again, but they train to the length of the fight. That's the beauty of it. With Carl's point, it's become there is a beauty, there is an art to boxing, and there is a strategy, far more. Well, I can't say far more, but a significant amount of strategy. Maybe a strategy with the fighters nowadays. It seems like, or maybe they're more vocal about it. But it seems there's more strategy involved based on numbers, based on film, what they're able to educate themselves with film, and we all know the use of film and how beneficial it was. We go back a lot to Schmeling's defeat of Joe Louis. Schmeling saw something on film, him dropping one of his, I think it was a right. But anyway. The advantages, the resources, but there was, I go back, looking at the war years, the 40s, again, there was a hardening of the fighters, and that point cannot be disputed because, I mean, how many of these, the fighters, they were rationed in the 40s, okay? You were rationed on gasoline, rationed on food. There were so many things going on that were sacrifices involved in their training, involved in just their general lifestyle, that those sacrifices are not being made to that extent today. Okay, that's one of the points we can't forget. And as far as, foot movement, oh my gosh, I spent considerable time with Willie, talking about Willie being Willie Pep, and talking about the way he moved his feet. How did you do it? Did you, what were you using? Were you using strings, strategy? What was it? He said, Mark, I was playing songs in my head. He said, just go ahead. He showed me some examples. I was playing in my head in the mood. You ever hear that song? This is the round I was playing at. This was the round I was playing this. Watch his movements and then put some music on, popular music at the time. And he took me through this stuff. I said, but that was never brought out before. You wouldn't tell anybody all that. I said, you're moving to music. And he admitted it. He had a jukebox in his house. But I have interviews where he says he hated music. Okay?
I will say this, where I agree 100% with Mike Silva on the attitudes of the old-time fighters were much better than the attitudes today.
I said earlier, mentally. They were stronger mentally, Jack.
Well, no, you have all these different weight divisions today, and they're not legitimate world champions in most cases. They're force-sanctioning bodies. So, so I don't want to hear about 4 champions, and they hold these junior titles that they meant hardly anything back in the day. Carlos Ortiz once told me when he held the junior welterweight title, it meant nothing to him at all. It wasn't like it was a real title to him. But today it's a big deal to these guys. And I even gave an example, with Shakur Stevenson a little while ago, and he disappointed me. He doesn't want to move up to fight Devin Haney at 147 if they can make the fight. He says they have to make it at 144. The old timers would jump up from 135 to 147 because the 140-pound junior welterweight title meant nothing. And now, you have these weight divisions 3 pounds apart. So the attitudes, were better in the past because the sport was administered a lot better than it is today. But with that said, we can see any fight today. In the past, if I wanted to see who won the fight between Emil Griffith and Tom Boggs, I'd have to wait about 3 weeks until Boxing Illustrated came out and got a copy of the magazine to find out who won.
So let's circle back, Jack, because the thing is what I said earlier was that today the fighters are trying so hard to preserve the O that they're not challenging themselves. So now we go back to the fact, okay, are they better? And that solidifies the points that Mike's making. And we're saying, okay, well, the technology with the training techniques and the nutritional changes and just the fact that, humans are bigger physically with all of the nutritional stuff. So you have all these advantages, the film, the study capabilities, and yet we all can agree that there's too many weight classes, too many titles, everything's diluted. And as Mike will point out, I'm sure with a number, there's so many less professional licensed fighters today, right, Mike?
Right. 2/3 less, yes. I went to BoxRec, Shepard, who runs BoxRec, when I was researching. I said, can you tell me how many wait, let me get the statistic. I have it here somewhere here. Wait a minute.
Well, and while you're finding that, the truth of the matter is promoters don't promote the way they used to. The fighters are promoting on social media. I mean, Mark just put out a book on William Bradley, talk about promoter, so I mean, but anyway, you got your stat, Mike?
Yeah. I also just want to say that if you're looking at the progression, first off, boxing has weight classes. I mean, you talk about, are they bigger, better, stronger? Well, we're talking, boxing is limited to weight classes.
Wait a minute. You don't forget about the weigh-in differences.
Well, that's another issue.
Okay. So they are, on fight night, 147 pounders in the ring at 162.
It's crazy. They've got to go back to same day weigh-ins. That's insane. But this is the statistic. According to BoxRec, the total number of pro bouts from 2000 to 2019 was 428,904. That's the total number of professional fights from 2000 to 2019. 28,904. The total number of pro bouts from 1921 to 1940 was 766,135. That's 337,332 more fights, an increase of 79% over the same 20-year period. Now, the reverse in the number of champions, the number of champions are now absurd. It's like 1,000% more champions, if you want to call them that, recognized by all these sanctioning organizations than in previous years. There is so much that has been detrimental to the sport that this all adds up.
Money.
Yeah, and they're bringing in, right. I mean, speaking of Carlos Ortiz, I remember he was looking at the money that Pacquiao and Mayweather, and he said, oh my gosh, he said, if I made what they made in this title fight, I would have retired with the money and left the sport. He could not believe the money they were making. And, and he was such a great champion.
So I have another point I want to make. I hear a lot of people, people in the sport, people that are, in the sport of boxing. And we always get, what's wrong with boxing, blah, blah, blah. And what I hear a lot is, well, the problem with boxing today is it's not on TV anymore. It's not on network television. But when you think about that, it's not really true, because before TV, everyone listened on the radio. Then TV came out and they started watching it on TV. Then cable came out and then we had to pay to watch it on premium channels. And then today with streaming, it's just a modern way of watching and getting that boxing content. So if that's not the problem.
No, it is the problem, because you're not exposing the general public. Boxing.
No, well, let me finish my question.
Go ahead.
Because my question is, if we're able to see it in basically any device you want because of the technology today versus in its heyday when it was on TV, why isn't it back in mainstream sports media like you alluded to before?
Part of it is not being taught in school. That's one thing. And schools there's no boxing classes in high school. Not like the old days where they used to have them. Now, God forbid, now that kid's got to deal with bullying because he doesn't know how to defend himself. There wasn't bullying the same way back then.
You can take karate.
But I'm going to
martial arts. Well, good luck with that.
The problem is now the zone. They're going to have most of the big fights because they have a part.
They have the little fights too. They have the little ones too, which I love.
But the zone, how many people get the zone? I finally gave in. I subscribed to it. I paid my $459 for the year, and I finally gave in.
Hey, let me tell you, I did it too, Jack. And you know what? I love it. I love watching the fights. A small club show in Europe. I like that because I know about all these fighters.
But to get what these guys said, okay, Mike mentioned the Boots Ennis and Zayas fight. I was there at the Barclays Center covering that show. Leaving that show, it's evident you don't have the same type of boxing fans that we were, young people who just go to the fight.
Great
for
point.
The fight. It's a social night out for them.
Yep.
It's date night. It's a night to just hang out with your friends. Boxing now, unfortunately, and I can't believe I'm building up Mike's argument the more I talk, is about personalities. You have Ryan Garcia fight Conor Benn in September. They announced it. What's Ryan Garcia accomplished? He's a media creation. I spoke in front of kids at the Boca Raton PAL, and I mentioned the names of Willie Pep and Tommy Hearns. They didn't even know who they were. I mentioned Ryan Garcia and Jake Paul, and all of a sudden they come to life. They want to ask me questions, and I mention those guys. We're living in a different world, and, it's what it is. But the bottom line is this. I think the elite fighters, the top guys in any sport, it evolves generally better in all sports now than they were in the past. The best basketball players, Bob Cousy isn't, there are a number of guys who'd be better than Bob Cousy today, for example. I'm not going to argue Bob Cousy, would have been, the best point guard in the NBA if he were playing today. maybe he would have adjusted to the technology. I mean, who knows?
Listen, I think you hit on it, and I'm curious to hear what you guys think. The fans. I think Jack just from his own observation in Brooklyn, it's the fans, and I agree, and that's why I've been saying, and I talked Mark's ear off for a couple of days about this stuff, that the fighters over in England, that whole fight scene over in the UK is exactly what we want it to be here. The fans love it. There's a diversified crew of fans, young, old, couples, people going in groups, not just a guy and a woman. It could be multiple guys, multiple women, whatever. And they're all cheering. They're loyal to their fighter. And it's not just a social. They're fans, Jack, and that's what I love about that scene. I wish it was like that here in the States, fellas.
Well, there's also more regulation there. There's more oversight. I
missed what you said. What did you say?
I said in the UK, there's more oversight overall in the sport. There's no central commission or anything that ended after boxing got out of New York.
No,
I don't blame the fighters for any of this. I believe it's the system that's evolved in the media and how they dealt with the sport.
No, I disagree with that. But when you talk about the fans, that Tyson Fury, Anthony Joshua, they're negotiating now, all parties, to see if the UK is going to Wembley Stadium. Will they stage a show at like 3 a.m. there? I mean, what do you do
in November? In November, which is going to be freezing. I agree, Carl. It's you don't blame the fighters, but what I do blame. Okay, everybody that watches this show knows I'm going to throw this in. That's why I believe the Zuffa model it could be the answer. And the reason why I say that is because that cuts down on the weight classes that we're all in agreement on, that we have too many. And, they don't cherry pick their fights. They have to fight, better fighters earlier on. So I think at the end of the day, it's going to cultivate a better quality fighter. What do you guys think, Jack?
I think the issue is the competition involved, not just in the ring, but with other sports. Remember the big fights. Ali Frazier, for example, the biggest of all time, was held on a Monday night. Can you imagine trying to hold any big fight, let alone the biggest event in history, on a Monday night?
No, I can't believe that Zuffa even does their fights on Sundays.
And let me tell you what bothers me more than anything else in boxing. And I don't remember this, unfortunately. When did the big fights used to end at night? At what time?
Okay? Certainly not at 2 in the morning.
I mean, I'm watching. I had my train was running the Long Island Railroad. I take to these Boots Ennis Sanders Zayas fight. And I want to make my train on time because I don't want to, it goes on the hour. So I don't want to get back home like 3 a.m. or whatever. And I'm actually hoping for a stoppage so I could get out of there. But the fights are ending they come on so late. Pacquiao Mayweather, it started like 1 a.m. on a Saturday night.
Well, not for Carl. Not for Carl, they're not at 1 a.m, right, Carl? Because he's out west. When you go to Vegas and you watch, they start at 3 o'clock. So yes, I agree with you here on the East Coast that the fights are much too late. But do you think the Zuffa model has some bite to it, guys, Carl?
I don't know that much about that.
Okay. It's similar to how about it's similar to the old way, actually, like what you were pointing out earlier about how it's changed.
Well, we do know that the addition of all the different weight classes has not expanded boxing. It hasn't made it bigger.
No, it hasn't.
No, it's given more people titles, and the sanctioning bodies make more money. What's your thoughts on that model, Mark?
Diluted the titles, absolutely. No question about it. I hear that all the time. I hear it from people still. It doesn't mean anything anymore. There's titles here, titles there. Some of the promoters create their own titles. There's no history behind it. There's no relevance behind it. But if the Zuffa model can support their actual matching strategy and get the fans to understand it and sell it properly, then it might work. I might support that.
Well, what you're seeing, and I've talked about this on the show when they first came out. What you're seeing, if you watch it, okay, is a lot of younger fighters, and I know Mike cringes when he hears this, but 10, 12-0 guys on their way up, fighting each other with Zuffa. Something you don't see as a norm. It's an exception today, not the norm. You see a guy like we were talking about, Boots Ennis. A guy that's 35-0, look at his record. Even Xander Zaya, same thing. The first majority of that whole record are not against anything close to top opposition. So I think what Zuffa will create is a pool of fighters that will be fighting. So the guy that keeps winning is actually a good fighter because he's beating other fighters of similar level, and if we can end up with one champion, and all Zuffa needed was exactly what they're getting, Shakur Stevenson. They're going to end up, I've said it on the show, Canelo's going to fight under their banner. Usyk might end his career under their banner.
But
and
still,
that's going to get fighters to sign with them.
But still, a point made earlier is no matter who they name as champion, the fans determine who the champion is. There's people you have to beat. Whether Tyson's fighting, we remember the Tyson era. Who cares who you fought until you fought and defeated Mike Tyson? Take whatever belt you want.
No.
Yeah, but even that, Mark, it's about emotions too. You mentioned Mike Tyson. He's called the youngest man to ever win the world heavyweight title. He wasn't. It was Floyd Patterson. It's still Floyd Patterson as far as I'm concerned. Tyson won a WBA title. And my guy, who I'm the biographer of his book, Michael Jinks Spinks, he was a legitimate world heavyweight champion. But when he entered the ring against Mike Tyson, in the mind of the majority of the public, Tyson was the man. It was emotionally, he was considered the champion.
And it's unfair, and he discounted Michael Spinks. I agree with you, Jack. There he did.
Jack knows that story.
Yeah.
Well, boxing is an iconic sport. It's not a franchise sport. And this is sort of the business mentality that's been going on for several decades, is the idea the ABCs are almost like divisions or teams, and the leaders are competing with their other fighters, and they're avoiding sending their best fighter against the other best fighter, because if their guy loses, then they think
they lose the marketability of that fighter.
The public doesn't relate to that. The public, it relates to, they understand with basketball or baseball and other sports that have annual championships to pare all that down and then start over. In boxing, there is no organization to enforce that, and people are not interested in. They don't know who the champion of the middleweight champion, whoever is, because as we said, they don't see enough boxing on TV for free, and it's not freely available, and they can't parse out 4 or 5 different alleged champions per expanded divisions. The public is not interested in that. That's not what the sport is about.
It's about brands. It's what you're saying. What you're saying is not wrong, but it's about brands. Unfortunately, in 10 days, Errol Spence fights Tim Tszyu. Errol Spence hasn't won in 5 years, and now he's in a pay-per-view event. Andy Ruiz just signed with Matchroom. Andy Ruiz was fortunate. He stopped Anthony Joshua. That gave him a gold card for the rest of his career. He could lose fight after fight. He could lose a fight, take off 3 years, return to the ring, get one easy win, and then get put in a big fight again. It's all about brands. It's wrong. It's absolutely wrong. But that's the reality of the situation that we're dealing with in the sport.
So that goes back to what I'm saying. We're all agreeing on this, but yet we're trying to convince the public that the fighters of today are more talented than the fighters of yesteryear. I mean, we're actually making the point that maybe it's not so, despite the nutritional and additional advantages that the
No,
fighters
that's
have
not
today.
true. That's not true. For example, Gennady Golovkin would handle a fighter like Billy Seuss, Ken Overland easily. Okay? I mean, that's the point, I wanted to make. The best guys. Was the sport better administered in the past? Yeah. Was the sport healthier in many ways in the past? Yeah, in many ways it was. But we're talking about the fighters, right? Who are greater fighters today, and I'm thinking the top guys more or less.
Yeah. The top guys are the ones we should be talking about. So you say we all agree that if Muhammad Ali was fighting today, he would be a champion today too, right? Do we agree with that?
Yeah, he would have the resources, and he would
have to, right? So regardless of all the physical advantages, a guy like Tyson Fury or any of these monster heavyweights today, despite that advantage, we still think that a Muhammad Ali would win, or I mean, would Jack Dempsey be able to handle his own against the heavyweights of today?
Well, when you're talking about heavyweights today, you're talking about maybe up to 3 divisions. These fighters are not comparable.
Okay, yeah. This is what I'm saying. This is exactly there's one division, and there were big guys back in the day too. But it's more they're just physically better today, theoretically. But as we're taking these superstars from these eras and we're sticking them in the modern era, my question is, do they still win? Does a Jack Dempsey beat a champion of today? I mean, I think he still could. I think he could beat a guy like Usyk. I do. I think a Jack Dempsey could beat a guy like Usyk.
I seriously doubt it. I think Usyk would have handled him without any difficulty. But in the case of even a Jack Dempsey, you look at a legendary champion who didn't fight Harry Wills, and this is another issue. And it even pertains to Joe Louis to an extent. Boxing was divided sometimes along racial lines. What top black fighters did Joe Louis beat until he stopped Joe Walcott, in their rematch late in his prime? I mean, John Henry Lewis, I kind of dismissed that at that point in John Henry's career. But, how do you do the comparison? I mean, it's hard.
Well, I know it's hard, and that's the beauty of the conversation. But the point is, we're all agreeing on certain factors, about the quality of opposition and the frequency of fights and all these things. But we're putting a lot of value in just the physical, especially talking about the heavyweights. We're putting, a lot of value in the physical size. And I think when you take the elite fighters of the earlier eras, I think you could make a strong argument that they would be competitive. I think of guys, Joe Frazier, who wasn't a big guy, but, his style, Sonny Liston, I just think that they would be able to compete.
Well, if I can ask kind of a hypothetical that we touched on earlier about other sports and improvements and, measurable improvements like in track and field and weight training, swimming, where timed, very structured competition. How much better are they? And I know records are broken. Are these records broken in small increments, or there's a really wide disparity between, the athletes of the 50s track and field versus today? Are we talking about 50% better? Are we talking about 5% faster? Because that goes a lot to what we're talking about in boxing. Are you familiar with those kinds of statistics?
Well, wait a minute. We could make the same argument with all sports, even track. The tracks are better now than they used to be. The sneakers are better now than they used to be.
That's a good point.
They're hydrating more. So I mean,
but still, the question is: Are we talking about times that are 25-30% better, or are we talking? What is that?
I think potentially we could have the best athletes on the planet right now, and that they would constantly get better as time goes on. I think that's potentially the case, whether it is or not, because the full package of all these other things that we add to this conversation, like the frequency, like the mental part, which I think is really huge. I think that's the equalizer where we're advancing. Just athleticism wise, I think we're regressing in other areas. That's the only reason, at least in my mind, that some of these fighters from yesteryear, especially the heavyweight division, would be able to compete. Other than that, the physical, a good big man will beat a good small man anytime, right? I mean, that's been the old saying.
I mean, like, it's not a yardstick of measurement in boxing like in other things. Like you mentioned track and field. Take road racing. Take the great American marathoner Bill Rogers, okay, who won New York Marathon 4 times, Boston 4 times. His personal best was 2:09:27 in the 1979 Boston Marathon. The world record for the marathoners went under 2 hours. Someone would be beating Bill Rogers' time by approximately 10 minutes today. I mean, things have evolved in the 7 years or so since then. But some athletes are ahead of their time. If you ask me whether Wilt Chamberlain could have been great in today's game, yeah, but he would have been a force. Absolutely. He would have been a super player if he were playing today. He was ahead of his time. Sugar Ray Robinson would have been fantastic if he was boxing today. Fantastic. But don't tell me, if you put Robinson in the ring against Sugar Ray Leonard, Roberto Duran, it's a mismatch. Terrence Crawford, he plays with those guys. I don't have patience for that type of mentality. If you tell me he was better than those guys, I have patience for that. But don't tell me there's no one even in Robinson's league, that it's not even worth discussing. That's the type of attitude that bothers me.
Well, they say that. They say I agree. I don't like when people act like they said that a lot about Floyd Mayweather. Oh, well, he's so good he can beat so and so. He doesn't have to fight him. And I believe that's ridiculous to even.
This brings up a good point, Billy. That the announcers throw around these names. These are huge names. You throw a name out there like Dempsey or Pep I mean, come on. I mean, the ridiculous comparisons. One of the HBO announcers saying, Deontay Wilder has a better jab than Larry Holmes. Seriously?
Like Mike was saying earlier, it's from the top to the bottom of the industry. We just don't have the knowledge anymore. All it takes, listen, I've said this a million times. You want to be a trainer. You want to be the guy in the corner that's the head trainer and you've never trained a fighter. Guess how you do it? You write a check for $50 and you get the head trainer's license in any of the boxing commissions in the U.S. And you know what? You're going to be the head trainer for that game, for that fight.
Hello, can I jump in?
That's the sad truth.
Can I jump in?
Sure.
Okay, I keep going in and out.
I know. I'm watching you.
Is beyond me. The technology is my enemy here. But, Robinson might not have been a walkover for Crawford. True. Robinson had a tough fight with Tommy Bell. These are good fighters. Good fighters when they're matched against each other. It's not a walkover. But, somebody will be superior. Somebody will win. Robinson had better, let's face it, better complete all-around skills. He was a phenomenon. Crawford is an outstanding fighter, certainly stands out during his day. Back then, Tommy Bell would have been given the other welterweights of that era and, LaMotta and so on. He would have been in the mix, but he wouldn't have been as dominant. That's the key. He wouldn't have been as dominant. Fighters today become dominant when, if you place them back, what I refer to the golden age from the 20s to the early 60s, he would have been in the mix, not necessarily winning a title. Competition was just too intense then. And again, you're talking about track and field. Yes, the incremental, they build up every year. Somebody breaks the new world record. What's the art of running? Putting one foot in front of the other, being in condition. It doesn't compare to boxing, which is really, it's no longer an art. Now I would rename the sport fighting with gloves. I don't consider it boxing today. Boxing is dead as far as I'm concerned in most cases. You occasionally see a fighter that might be, a little bit of a throwback. Lomachenko, Usyk, very good skills. By the way, Dempsey would have destroyed Usyk, my opinion. But as far as, you weigh 190 to 210, you have enough physical power to hurt anybody if you can punch. Dempsey hit harder at 190 pounds than most fighters could hit at 250 pounds. It was faster.
Mike, didn't they do a study and prove that that's why there was so many light heavyweights went to heavyweight, because it was 175 pounds that you had the same power that you could knock out a heavyweight?
No. Most light heavyweights went to heavyweight for the money. Most of them.
No, but I mean, they still had the knockout power at 175.
If they moved up?
Yeah, if they fought.
No. Billy Conn, it's interesting. Billy Conn, who could punch, he was a hard puncher for light heavyweight, moved up to heavyweight, actually stopped Bob Pastor, stopped some decent heavyweights.
Ezra Charles?
Ezra Charles was like another Sugar Ray Robinson. Ezra Charles was a larger version of Sugar Ray Robinson.
Pretty good at heavyweight too.
Yes, he was an outstanding. You get the lighter fighters. A lot of them came up for either welterweight, middleweight, moved into light heavyweight. So at the lighter weights, they had to learn how to box. They had to be better. The heavyweights have always historically been the weakest division in boxing. I don't care what era you go back to. They are always the weakest division because they, rely on strength, rely on the punch. You're lighter, you have to rely on not just, speed and technique. It's more important. And the heavyweights, they're the money division. So fighters are built up quickly. But to me, you want to see what era produced the best fighters. Go to the lightweight and the middleweight division. The lightweight and the middle, and see who the best fighters were in that era. And then you can judge what era was best.
Okay, so let me ask you this, Mike. You said boxing's golden age was basically about a 40-year period, the 20s to the 60s, or approximately, right?
Yeah, right.
Now you talk lightweight, take Pernell Whitaker, brilliant fighter. You mean to tell me you would clearly place these other great lightweights ahead of Pernell Whitaker? Yeah,
of course.
Was there more? You're saying
we have proof already.
Well, there's never proof. There's proof. It's always opinion.
I can give you proof. No, you can put evidence. Then it's your decision whether in a courtroom you prevent evidence. It's up to the jury to decide if the evidence is enough to convict and so on. His Pernell Whitaker. They said Whitaker. Who does the fighter you just mentioned?
Pernell Whitaker. I mean, you're not going to tell me.
Pernell Whitaker was an outstanding fighter, no question. He would have been difficult in any era. However, there were flaws that in the vicious competitive lightweight division of the 30s, 40s into the early 50s, there were fighters there who would have known how to take an advantage. A lot of times he was off balance in the way he fought. There were the fighters he fought, which he dominated many of them because they weren't up to his level. Again, throw him back in an era of far more difficult competition. And there are other fighters who would look at him in a scientific way and figure, what do I do with this guy? He's got tremendous natural ability. What do I do? What are his flaws? The trainer would look at the fighter. You don't have that today. I'm certainly not disparaging Whitaker. He was a hell of a fighter.
Great
but
fighter.
I tell you who would have competed at lightweight is Duran at lightweight. I think he's successful in any era.
Duran was a great fighter, no question.
As a lightweight, we're talking lightweight.
Yeah, as a lightweight, he was a great fighter. And again, he was successful in the welterweight, middleweight division because he had to be so good as a lightweight. He had to be smart, and he became smarter. You know, he won the title. He's one of the few fighters that won the title in his like 29th or 30th fight, and then had 50 fights while champion. He actually developed into a great fighter while he was the champion. Unusual. But in those days, you could fight more often, which is what he did. And interestingly enough, the fighters who gave him the most trouble were the guys who stuck and moved and boxed him. Esteban de Jesus, Viruet, the other guy. You know, these are guys who saw that you never mix with this guy. He'll kill you. So you stick him and move him. You got to be constantly on the move with Duran. And those fighters who were able to last the distance, Saul Mambi, you know, the other guy, I forgot his name, in Miami, went 10 rounds with him. Savvy, experienced fighters. Duran, great fighter, but there were great fighters in the 30s who had difficulty with other fighters who weren't necessarily great. But
you think like a Barney Ross would have been able to?
That's a tough fight to call. I'd say that's a toss-up. That's a tough fight to call. Ross was a superlative boxer. And if you just watch him, he's one of the fighters that you watch on film, even if you're not really knowledgeable about boxing, you could see this guy is doing something that's very intelligent in the ring. It's something that you can see. That's a pretty much of a toss-up. But again, you had fighters like Billy Patrol. I mean, in his prime, Billy Patrol was not just one of the toughest fighters that ever lived, and beat some great fighters, but he could outgut you. Okay. And Duran, what bothers me, I know he redeemed himself, but the very fact that he could pull the no mas bothers me. It's that little bit of something within him, something there that might be the edge that might not overcome some of the greats of the 30s
you know
and 40s.
So, wait a minute.
But I don't argue.
I had that, Mike. I had that discussion actually the other day about the no mas fight. And the whole thing is I agree with the theory. He shouldn't have quit, right? But it wasn't because of anything other than frustration. He wanted to stand and fight with Sugar Ray Leonard, especially with all of the buildup to that particular fight. And Sugar Ray just tormented him mentally, and he wanted no more part of it, no mas. And I don't agree with it, but that's what it was because. And I don't think you should hold that against him in terms of seeing if he would be able to have competed. I don't
hold it against. He redeemed himself, and for the rest, he fought then just to redeem himself for the no mas, and he's a great fighter. But you look at how many fighters will actually do that. The great fighters, even if frustrated, and they don't do that. He was. Oh, look, I love Duran. I was witness to a truly great fighter. But, I don't know. I'm not sure what would happen in a fight with him and Henry Armstrong, Barney Ross, Tony Canzoneri, Kid Chocolate. Not Kid Chocolate, a little too light, but Kid Gavilan. I mean, these are very tough fights. But again, these are great fighters matching against. This is a non-argument. I don't argue with people if they say I want to place Muhammad Ali ahead of Joe Louis. I don't argue with them. That's so close, it's not worth an argument. I will argue with you if you put Canelo Alvarez in a top 10 all-time middleweight class. Then I'll argue with you. He doesn't.
Okay, well, that's
I think he hit it on the head
now, though. That's what we're facing now because a lot of the fans today are trying to put these fighters in those all-time great status. I mean, this heavyweight Moses Ituma. They already got. I've seen stuff on social media where they have all-time great heavyweights, and they have him at number 10. The guy hasn't fought anybody. He's got 2 fights against known names. One was kind of fishy with the Dillian White fight, and then the other one was Jermaine Franklin. I mean, to me, that doesn't put you in the Hall of Fame. And the fans are so supportive. They think it's great.
That the frame of reference is different. The perspective. Most boxing fans today are under 30. And they don't have that perspective. But the word great is thrown around so absurdly, to such wretched excess that it doesn't mean anything anymore. The title of world champion doesn't mean anything anymore. Boxing is the only major sport, that constantly shoots itself in the foot. It it should be up there with NBA. I mean, it should have a multi-million-dollar contract with a network if it was run right, but it can't be run right because boxing has a terrible resume. It's ruled by greed. It always has been. It's always had a bad element in it and always will have a bad element. It can't
Well,
be. It can't change. It can't.
Well,
I think,
Jack,
I think,
if people want it, if people are supporting it, and they're showing up to the big fights like you mentioned earlier, I mean, it's a business at the end of the day. So isn't give the people what they want mentality?
Well, yeah. Look, the big fights still draw. If you can get a big fight, the fighter struggling still is only making $100 for a 4-rounder in many places. I mean, boxing. Look, there's no question.
Not anymore.
Boxing always has great appeal, but the potential for boxing is bigger than any sport, in my opinion. But the people who run it destroy it. They
Mike,
don't.
But Jack was just telling us before about the crowd, right, Jack? I mean, it was they're the ones that are supporting and getting these fights, in the limelight, so to speak.
yeah, but I want to make a point about weight divisions. It's not as important, unfortunately, as it used to be because there's so many weight divisions. Fighters, for the most part, don't stick around one weight division for the majority of their career. So it's hard to rate them. A case in point would be Roy Jones. I mean, the best fighter of his era. But what weight division would you rate him in? Okay. I mean, he moved around middleweight, super middleweight, light heavyweight, even had a brief stay, at heavyweight. So, I mean, it's hard. It's really hard. Duran, you rate as a lightweight, even though he moved up divisions eventually. So I think we're more stuck on pound for pound lists today than we are, in any particular weight divisions. Outside of heavyweight, of course.
It's like that with all sports, I mean, to tell you the truth, kids today don't follow a team. I mean, I have the unfortunate. I'm a Jets and Mets fan. I've been since I'm 6 years old, and I follow the team. The kids today, they follow the player. They're looking at the stats. There's players jump from team to team. And it's almost like I get that feeling with boxing sometimes. Not that there's teams, but that the fans, go for a boxer, and which is great, but they rule out all these things we're talking about, like the level of opposition, and they'll pound on their chest when their fighter gets a knockout over a guy that can't break an egg, and I know, Carl, you've seen a lot of that, what I'm saying with the old films compared to the way they're fighting today.
Well, I think can we agree that there were more better fighters, more competitive fighters, more better fighters in earlier period than today?
I think we all agree on that. I think it would be hard to argue. I mean, I don't know. I agree with that. Mark, you agree with that?
Yes, I do agree with that.
Yeah, and I think Jack does too, right? Jack, we lost Mike again, but the thing is you got to remember to unmute your mic.
Yeah, I know. I was just reading the comment made that Mike mentioned about for a round fight, it's $100 a round. Boxing's run completely different.
No. There's no more $100 a round, and that's what's ruined the sport in a sense, because we don't have those. It's side A and side B now, which is also ridiculous. I mean, again, you could go back in the old days, and if you wanted to bet on a fight, a lot of the fights were 50-50 fights. Today, I see odds you're laying $1,500 to win 100. And that's if you're lucky. That's how these fights are really not even at all. But yes, I would say, Carl, that we all kind of agree that the fighters were in their eras earlier were better. The argument is if we could magically take them in the Twilight Zone situation and pluck them into today, I believe that they would be competitive. But to take a couple of the weight classes, specifically the heavyweight, I think it would be hard.
There's too much of a weight differential at the going from 190 to 250 plus. That's just not. It's just too difficult to make a direct comparison that way.
I still go back, Billy, to trying to compare them in their era. In support here, I mentioned the Ring magazine from February 2022, who took all the fighters and their ability to fight ranked fighters, and who's number 16? Pernell Whitaker. Yeah. He's ahead of Henry Armstrong, by the way. So there's
hey, listen, it depends. It depends who's voting. I mean, and we're starting to see that today with the International Boxing Hall of Fame and some of the fighters that are getting in. I think you and I talked about it when you got inducted in Florida. That there's people on the panel now that never saw Mike Tyson fight live. And they're picking the guys that are going into the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, and you mention names to them, and they have no idea who you're talking about.
Well, that's kind of scary, don't you think?
It is. It is very scary, extremely scary. A lot of people are falling between the cracks, and I figure that's part of my job is to dig them out and educate them more. And thankfully, we talked about this before. The fight fans are becoming more educated because of all the access to resources. They're getting smarter, and they're also asking for more in their resources. I have to do more. When I put a book out, I've got to answer their questions ahead of time. I have to go beyond what's been offered before because that's their expectation now.
Yeah, I know when I was president of the Boxing Writers Association of America, one of the things I did for the Hall of Fame voting, I put together a committee. They wrote bios on all the candidates, and we stressed to the members, to read them.
Well, that's good.
And then people make their choices. But it's so difficult, voting on the Hall of Fame, like comparing a past era to this one. I mean, because there's so many variables that go into it. It's difficult. I mean, some are no-brainers. I mean, there's certain fighters with slam dunk Hall of Famers without question. And then you look at this year's class, and I didn't feel comfortable with it. Antonio Tarver, Nigel Benn. I didn't feel comfortable with names like that, as Hall of Famers. But are we living in a different world?
What did Tarver do to get into the Hall of Fame besides Roy Jones Jr.? What else?
He actually lost once to Roy Jones Jr.
No, I know, but he did beat him. But remind me, what else did he do that was so great?
He won rematches against Eric Harding and Glenn Johnson after losing to them the first time.
Glenn Johnson, I'll give him, but Eric Harding, is he a Hall of Famer?
No.
Right.
Glenn Johnson's not a Hall of Famer.
No, he should be. But
Glenn Johnson?
I think Glenn Johnson, yeah.
I don't think so, but
Hey Jack, do you think the Hall of Fame should split and do kind of what the Baseball Hall of Fame did?
Let me tell you the way they should do it. The Hall of Fame, rather than have isolated people vote like members of the Boxing Writers Association of America, and this is a group I'm still closely affiliated with.
Absolutely.
There's certain members who just aren't fit to vote. They're not fit to vote. I mean, and I'm not even fit to vote on one category, the women's category. So I keep it very tight. I don't check off the few names that I'm allowed to check off. I get a ballot for that. If there's a no-brainer like with Christy Martin on the ballot, obviously she's going to get a vote. But the way to do it is get the most knowledgeable historians, guys like Henry Haskell, Don Majeski. Get about 20 of them in a room for a weekend, and they should do it the way a jury would come to a verdict. And butt heads, talk it out. Get the most knowledgeable guys and discuss it. Make an argument for certain candidates, back and forth.
Billy, can I cut in? Can I cut in?
Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, before I cut out, I'm sorry that I keep cutting out here, but first I have to be going soon. I just want to congratulate Jack on his new book on Michael Spinks.
Oh, thank you,
Yeah, I
Mike.
can't wait to read it. It's an interesting character, and I'd love to read your take on him. Also, Carl and Carl and Mark, I'm in awe of your prolific ability to put out so many books. I struggled, and I put out 4 books in 20 years and struggled over each one. I'm sure you struggled also.
You put out some sensational books, Mike.
What?
I mean, your people love your books, and I've heard so many good things about them. You're doing a great service, what you're doing.
Absolutely.
We
Thank you.
appreciate
Thank you
very, very much.
Thank you. I appreciate that coming from you, Mark. And Carl also, I don't know how you do it. I mean, you must be writing every single day. But I have to be running. It was an honor to serve on the same panel with you. I'm sorry I had so much technical difficulty. This is a topic that I love to discuss because in exchanging this information, we each grow a little bit, and get another perspective. So it's always good. Maybe we could do it again. But I wish all of you a great week, and I hope you're not suffering too much in this heat.
Yeah.
Mike, thanks a lot. Be good.
All right.
Mike.
Take care, guys. Bye-bye.
Take care, Mike.
Mike Silver.
Can I just tell you a funny story with Nat Fleischer? Nat Fleischer, as you guys know, was the biggest advocate for the old timers ever. And when I was a kid, I would call up the Ring Magazine office and kind of harass Nat Fleischer, have fun with him. And one day I call up and I say, who would have won a fight between Joe Louis and Bob Fitzsimmons? And I could tell no one ever asked him that question because he hesitated and was thinking. And he said, well, I think it would have been a close fight, but I think Fitzsimmons would have edged him. The next day I call up Dan Daniel, who works there, and Daniel was buddies with Fleischer. And I asked Dan, Fleischer told me that Fitzsimmons would have beaten Lewis. He said, don't listen to the old man. Lewis would have murdered him.
well, the truth of the matter is, I think we can all agree, you always look at that previous era and say, oh, these guys are nothing compared to – I mean, every era they've all said it, and that's what makes this topic so interesting. I think what I appreciated the most tonight was the fact that you guys kind of burst my bubble. I got to be honest. The three of you kind of burst my bubble right out of the gate when you started using all of the reasons why the fighters of today would be better. It was all my defense against you guys. I figured I totally had you all wrong. I thought you were going to be picking the old-time fighters. But I do think that you have to put a lot of emphasis on the physical training advantages and the nutritional advantages and all those things that the fighters have today. I just wish we could take the mentality, the toughness of the fighters of yesteryear and the numbers, overall quantity of fighters, and put them with today's advancements. And, man, wouldn't we have a great sport?
Absolutely.
And you mix in the fans that don't abandon a fighter after they lose once,
It's kind of ironic. Before Cus D'Amato had met Mike Tyson, we're talking about, it must have been like the early 1970s, late 60s. D'Amato, as we know, is close friends with Jim Jacobs, fight film collector. And D'Amato said after Jacobs showed him all the films, he changed his views, that the modern guys of that time, we now consider old timers to an extent, were better than the old timers of before. But he echoed what you said, Billy. But the old timers were such tough guys. We don't know what type of men they were. They may have actually, in a sense, outlasted, some of the guys that came later just based, on their toughness.
Their mental toughness. That's what I was trying to point out earlier, that, mentally, and it's not just fighters, it's all sports. I mean, you see these guys twist an ankle and they're out for a month. They're on the 15-day disabled list, and back in the day, they would Charlie Burley used used to break his hands every time he hit something. There was stories of him putting a broken, fractured hand in a glove the night of the fight. And today, a fighter hurts his finger and he stops. So I just and I'm not saying it's not smart. Maybe they will have normal hands when they age, but the truth of the matter is you don't have the mental toughness. You just don't. And I think that's the one thing this particular sport is missing. But then again, it's easier for me to say that behind a microphone than the guys in the ring, right?
There's I read at one point a story about the Lewis-Walcott rematch that Walcott was winning going into the 11th round and had he was doing very well in the fight. And the referee started harassing him. The referee said, "Stop all this dancing around and start fighting."
Right. It was different style, right?
And despite the fact that he was ahead on points, and he threatened to disqualify him. Whether he was going to do it or not, I don't know. But Walcott then decided he would take more risks, and we know what happened when that changed. He got knocked out. I think that if we want to compare a lot of the modern guys with techniques to the older guys, we would see a fair amount of decision wins on points, not in domination and not in, completely outclassing the older guys. And I'm talking about some of the good older guys. That we would see a fair amount of decision wins on points based on, the system that we have today. Just because that's the way they fight today.
Right.
They fight for points.
No, that a win's a win. Hey guys, we're gonna wrap it up, but before we go, as we exit out of here, let's talk about the heavyweight division and who you think at this point, up to today, who do you think is the all-time best heavyweight in your opinion, as of today? And maybe next year you might think differently, but we'll start with you, Jack. Who's the best heavyweight?
I mean, it's an easy bracket that Ali Lewis are 1-2, and then there's everyone else. I mean, we're talking based on accomplishments, longevity. You look at Ali's level of competition; it's phenomenal throughout his career. Let's even forget the big fights. Just his secondary wins over guys like Ernie Terrell, Ron Lyle, Floyd Patterson, etc. I mean,
Ernie
that's not even
Shavers,
a monster
Quarries.
win. Right. I mean, so you have to give it to Ali based on that. And of course, Lewis with longevity. And he did beat quality, guys, a string of former heavyweight champions on the way up. So those guys are clearly 1-2. If you want to argue who would have won between them and Rocky Marciano, for example, that's a completely different debate. But Billy, I will say this, though. You mentioned before about fighters trying to protect the O, and Floyd Mayweather's primarily blamed for that. But maybe it's the Marciano fans that should be blamed for that, because that's what they use for the argument to say Rocky's better. He's unbeaten. He never lost. But
wait a minute. But that record, I get so frustrated when people talk about that, because the 49-0 was no other heavyweight has ever reached 49-0. That's it. That was the argument. The Ali thing, that's a generational thing. Oh, he woulda, coulda, shoulda. But yeah, it would be hard to argue if they would have fought. It would have been interesting. Who knows? But you say Ali, Mark. Who do you think is the best up to today, best all-time heavyweight?
Okay, I'll give you Ali first, Lewis, and then tie for third, Jack Johnson and Sam Langford.
Yeah, all right. So basically what you say is Muhammad Ali. Yeah. Carl, who do you think, brother?
The list is too long to have a definitive top down, but I'll agree. Lewis and Muhammad were the most consistent over the longest period of time with the best competition. and had faced and survived adversity, came back. Lewis, his rematches, he destroyed in rematches. He didn't just win. He destroyed guys. That's why I think a 2-fight Muhammad Ali and Lewis fight, the first one, Ali would pretty much run away with. The second one, I'm not so sure.
As for me, I mean, it's hard to argue those three guys, and I'm glad that Mark brought up Sam Langford, because he also was great in many other weight divisions too. But Rocky Marciano, Ali, and Joe Louis. But I gotta rock the boat here out of the four of us, and I think the best heavyweight ever. And I know it's hard to convince people, especially younger people, but I say Jack Johnson. And the reason I say Jack Johnson is because just of all the reasons we were saying, during eras and only being as good as the best in your era, et cetera, Jack Johnson was miles above everyone else in his era, despite even the losses, because it was a different time. He was like, if he wasn't up to it, he got the money and ran. But I think Jack Johnson, and I also think he helped boxing go in the direction that it did. So guys that came after him, like Dempsey and Lewis and Ali and Rocky Marciano, were able to succeed.
Billy, I think we look at signature wins, and I'm not completely sold on Jack Johnson, Billy Marks. You know what you had to say? His defining win was over Jim Jeffries, who'd been out of the ring for 6 years. Jeffries was a shell of himself.
No, that was the defining. Yeah, but wait a minute. That was the defining win as far as the white America was concerned. All right, because he had beaten every other. Listen, there was a lot of historians claim that era, the James Jeffries, Jack Johnson era, was by far the best era for heavyweights. If you take and look at those guys and how tough they were, I mean, there were so many of them, and they fought so frequently. It's hard, like we said on this whole show, to compare eras. But I just think for the whole work during that time, he was such an influential heavyweight that he even surpasses even a guy like Muhammad Ali, who was worldwide. I think Muhammad Ali's fame got bigger after he stopped boxing. So I don't know. I'm just trying to.
Well, even Ali would talk about Jack Johnson in those glowing ways. He'd say they say I was bad, but Jack Johnson was crazy. The things he'd do. They'd have guns coming to the fight, and he would laugh in their face.
Listen, my favorite story of Jack Johnson, and we got to pack it in, but my favorite story was, he was, he liked cars, right? He would like race cars, and he was in his car. He was racing across, I believe it was in Oklahoma, and he gets pulled over by a cop, and the guy says to him, you're speeding, blah blah blah. And back then they gave you a ticket and you had to pay for it, or they threw you in jail right on the street. So the guy says it's a $50 fine, the cop, and Jack Johnson hands him a $100 bill. And he says, I said it's 50. I don't have this kind of change. And Jack Johnson says, yeah, well, I'm going to be going just as fast on my way back home through here. So you might as well keep the 50 for that. And that puts it in perspective of how he was. He just, I don't know, maybe I'm putting more emphasis in Jack Johnson, the man, than the guy in the ring. But during his time, he was very influential on the sport, in my opinion. But guys, listen, I really appreciate you coming on and being involved in our first roundtable show. We're going to do them 6 times a year. Every other month I'm going to do them. We'll pick different topics and we'll do it. And hopefully we can have you guys back in the future.
Wonderful. It's an honor being with both you guys.
Yeah, I had a great time, especially,
thanks, Jack.
Mark, Paul. I hadn't met you guys before, great time with you guys doing the show. And thanks for having me on, Billy.
Well, I'll tell you one thing. We may do something in the future where we're all in the same place, and we'll film it. And I know Mark got to witness our traveling setup, which is pretty cool. And maybe we can coordinate something and get together soon.
Love it. Beautiful.
All right, guys. I appreciate it, and to everybody out there, I hope you enjoyed the show. And until next time, make sure you tune in next week. Same bat time, same bat channel. Until then, I'll leave you with this. Ciao, baby.